Okay, hey now everybody. We're back, brand new show. Hopefully you guys enjoy this. Quick run through of the best tips I could come up with for food plots. So if you're doing food plots this year, make sure you check out this show. Hopefully this improves your food plot season and overall your hunting season. Enjoy the show. All right, hey everybody, we are live. The mic is live. Brand new take aim, and it's that time of year. Turkey season is fast approaching, or pretty much already been here for the majority of us, not including Michigan, so not me. But from Alabama, everywhere else, turkey season has started. But I know pretty much around the country, as soon as turkey season is over for most of us bow hunters, the next thing we're on to is food plots. So here are some tips to get you through if this is your first time ever doing a food plot or just looking to improve your game. Maybe one of these tips will help you and make a successful food plot season a little better for you guys. But tip number one's a pretty easy one and really probably the most common tip you ever get when you talk about doing food plots, and that is do a simple soil test. And what a soil test will do will tell you exactly how much fertilizer you need, including stuff like nitrogen, phosphate. It will tell you, the sulfur level, and if you need micronutrients such as zinc or magnesium, stuff like that. A lot of the fertilizer companies can mix this right in with lesser elements and sell it to you right in the bags, and you can apply it directly, onto your food plot. So make sure you get to soil tests. You got to figure out what's the pH level, the nitrogen level in your ground. So that's a huge one. So make sure you always start with that. Take the time to do it. It's a real simple process. You're going to pull dirt out of the ground from about, 6 inches deep, and you're going to send it in to get tested. And usually in 3 to 5 short days, you'll have the results back, and it will tell you exactly what you need to do to improve the soil. So make sure you do that. So the next thing you want to kind of look at is what are the types of food plots people talk about. And basically, I think it's really broken down real simple into greens and grains. So typically, it's real simple. When you think of greens, you're going to think of stuff like chicory. You're going to think of stuff like clover. You're going to think of stuff like brassicas, anything that has a green color to it. On the grain side, you're going to think of stuff like cereal grains like winter wheat, oats. You're going to think of, a lot of people consider your soybean, your corn. Those are on the grain side of food plots. And there's pros and cons to each of those, from the grains to the greens. And when you plan your food plot and you're trying to design this and think about when's the most amount of time you're usually going to get to hunt. When do you get to spend that maximum amount of time out there? And you kind of want to design these food plots around your exposure to getting to your property to hunt. And if you're going to do greens, usually the clovers, the chicory, stuff like that, it really seems to benefit in moderate to really fair temperatures. And then you're going to kind of plan your grain stuff, your soybeans, your standing corn. You're going to do that for the harsher temperatures, or the little bit of what you would just call it flat out the later parts of the season. Your late October, your November, your December, even January for some of the states that have the extended January season. And what that does is, guys say it all the time, what they would do, they throw $1 million if at the moment they had a late season standing food plot. When they say standing, that usually, again, means a grain of a soybean or a corn. So plan those things to when you're going to have your time off of work, and design that food plot to what you need. And if it's late season foods, do it that way. You want to maximize your food plots to maximize your hunting. So I guess my bad, I haven't really been keeping number tabs going with the tips. So we'll basically, the first two are already done, so we're going to call this tip number 3. But to go along with that, architect architecture design of you and your hunting and what to plant. So to do that as well, you really want to take a look at your property, and you want to design these food plots to what I really think is location and access. When I say location, you kind of want to make sure some of these plots, at least to me, aren't visible to a neighbor's field or a road or two-track. Especially here in Michigan in pressured states, you want to keep away from, having some other person wanting to basically piggyback off your side of the property or do something worse and trespass. So always use this to, build these plots to where they're not visible if you can help it from roads and property boundaries. It's really important. Don't tempt the neighbors. We don't want to tempt anybody to be a poacher. And if you can't do that, what you need to do is basically, we're just going to property block them. We're going to use things like sun hemp, Egyptian wheat, or even corn. I'm not really a big fan of sorghum. I think it's noisy. I think a lot of the deer don't like it because of that noise. But corn's a great blocker. The sun hemp works extremely well. It gets really tall, and it grows super fast. It's really durable, and it does not take a lot for sun hemp to kind of grow in any type of soil. It's just a great kind of all-around access blocking plot. So keep that in mind when you're structuring and planning out some of these food plots, and you're trying to come up with what you should do on your property. When can you hunt, and your access to get in, and keeping the visibility down from roads and neighbors. So that's a huge one to me, and just a great thought when you're doing some of this. It can give your property such an advantage to make those little changes like that. Also, the next tip is don't be afraid to use just the natural contour of the land. So, if you got a, let's say a bottom and a finger that comes up and it bends around, don't be afraid to use that. Let it follow around. Let natural corridors like that create space for your food plots and create space for deer travel. So don't be afraid to follow the natural contours of the land. These are just features that deer follow, like I said, and just because you're dedicating this year to do a food plot does not mean it has to be a rectangular or a square food plot. It can look any way you want it, any shape and any design to make, your hunting and your hunting property better. So always use the natural contours of the land. That's a huge benefit. And another thing, once you get into a year or two of doing food plots, don't be afraid, especially after 2 years, don't be afraid to rotate your crops. It's really important, especially in the brassica side, which should not be grown on the same site more than 2 years in a row because of the potential for disease and pest problems. So always make sure, try not to go longer than 2 years with the brassicas. Obviously, if you're doing clover, that's something different. Clover, if it's maintained well, man, I learned a lot last year, a lot in 2016. We did a clover plot. I did some research, talked with a couple guys, and, my buddy Brian in Alabama, I think he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he had a clover plot that, he reseeds, keeps it fertilized, and he's had basically the same plot of clover for like 9 years now. So clover can do some great things. It's not one of those things that just every 2 to 3 years will die off. If you maintain it, keep it fresh, keep it trimmed, you can have that clover plot for a very long time and it will stay healthy. So, which is really kind of cool that, you can basically plant something once and take the fruits of the labor from that and turn it into a 5, 6 to 9 year extension like that is pretty freaking awesome on a hunting property. I know I talked a little bit about kind of blocking the access from a neighbor or a road, but even if your property is lacking cover, a great thing to do again is plant rows of Egyptian wheat, use the sun hemp or native warm season grasses such as switchgrass or Indian grass, or even standing corn. And One thing to do there, though, if you're going to do the standing corn to add cover or any of those, sometimes you may have to use one of those hot wire fences and kind of let it grow up. I mean, you're planting it for cover, right? So you don't want it to be trimmed out before it has a chance to grow and mature. So if you have to, don't be afraid, even on the grain plots, the soybean, even though that's not cover. But the same thing, if you're going to use that for late season or this stuff for cover, don't be afraid to use those hot fences. Block it off, corner them off, and keep the deer out of there so they're not ate up before it has a chance to grow and mature. But if you need to do anything like that, like I said, farm or the hunting property you lease is just lacking cover, those things like that, you can plant rows of Egyptian wheat, rows of corn. You can do just a thicket of sun hemp. This stuff just grows, real tall, real thick. All those things, man, will just deer love cover, and that's a great thing to do, in conjunction with your food plots, is just to add some cover. And another, I think, just really great tip, even though we cannot predict the weather, but try to make sure that you can plant right before a light rain. Preferably not like a downpour. The harder it's going to rain, the more likelihood that you could risk the chance of basically washing away some of your seed. And it will kind of prevent, spotty washouts or a big clump of seeds, growing up in one spot and not having a nice laid over blanket of seeds. So try to avoid the downpour rain. But man, if you get lucky and it's going to rain in the next 2 or 3 days, and you can get that stuff done and seed broadcast it out before a light rain, it really kickstarts your food plot and gives your food plot such a better chance to take off, which I think is phenomenal. And that should always be a rule, but like I said, it's really hard to predict the weather, obviously. But if you get the opportunity, try to make that happen. So another thing to do, too, and I think it's a phenomenal tip, is always consider like your stand placement. Where are you going to be? Consider the wind, the sun direction, certain evening sets. I don't want to spend the whole evening with that sun blasting me right in the face, right in my eyes, where it's making me fidget and move around a lot to try to locate and look for deer. So consider the wind, your sun direction, everything surrounding you from the cover, so you have the right approach to that food plot stand, and you can get in and out without being detected, which is really important. So it goes back to some of the other tips earlier in this podcast about designing and building that food plot all the way from the get-go. Make sure you know every tip and corner of your property and how you're going to access, get out. But all that is kind of one tip right there, but I'm just trying to break it apart just to make it a little easier. Now, another great tip, and you see this a lot with the farmers going down the roads, and you'll actually see this now. It seems like I see it now more than ever, and I don't know why that is, but they're always removing rocks. So the same thing with your food plot. If you can, remove rocks, remove debris of big roots, branches that have fallen. You need a smooth, firm, basically real firm, flat seed bed for the best crop, especially if you're going to cultipack it so you get a good soil and seed contact. So if you can remove those rocks, the debris lays out the soil so much better, and you're going to have a much better seed and food plot, after the growing season starts. That's a big tip. Another tip, too, is on your bigger pieces of property. If you have big fields that you potentially are going to have access to multiple tree stands on these field edges, let's say like a basic L shape to the right is where that field bends, and lots of times this could be 10 acres apart or 15 acres apart. Well, you may not food plot all of that naturally because you want a focus area of travel for these deer near your stands. But those fields, if they can see each end of that field, sometimes one deer on the opposite side of that field may see a coyote, and he actually blows and leaves the field, and pretty much everybody leaves. Every deer in that field, which is could be hundreds of yards apart. It's blown. So another good thing to do is use that stuff like the Egyptian wheatgrass, the sun hemp, or even the corn just to block the view from deer this part of the field to that part of the field. Another thing that does too, besides keeping it safe for the deer that are in front of your stand, it is going to allow for a little more action on those evening sets or morning sets during the rut. It's going to cause deer to travel a little bit more, which I think is real important. But as important is that safety aspect. In case that field or one half of that field gets blown out, it doesn't blow the whole field out. And I think that's a great tip that I learned recently. And man, it just is such a smart idea to do that. You've seen it 100 times. You've seen it on video 100 times. When a deer blows and it leaves, everybody's gone. So if you can separate them and they can't all see each other, you have such more likelihood that those deer on your side of the field aren't going to leave. Another thing, we get what we get, especially with property. Lots of us aren't landowners. Lots of us are leasing land or we get permission. But if you can, another great tip is you want to pay attention to that sun. So if you can, you want to lay out some of these plots facing south and west for like your late summer and fall plantings. This way, they're just going to get the maximum amount of afternoon sun, especially during, later in the season, that fall comes and the temperatures start to drop a little bit. This will keep those food plots a little more healthy and just getting more exposure to the sun that way, which is obviously really important as well. So another thing is a great tip is, again, everybody's budget is different. Do what you can, but don't buy cheap seeds. Don't skimp. If you can, per budget, buy the highest quality seed you can to just literally ensure that you're getting the best results you can get from pretty much the hassle, the workload, the time and energy you put into growing a food plot. Or, from the beginning when it's just dirt to clearing it out. I mean, all of that is just so time consuming. So don't get to the end, to the important part, and buy cheap seeds. So if you can, high quality seeds, and like I said, that's going to really help ensure that you're going to have a food plot that works for you and not against you. Another thing that I think is pretty important is if you can, especially if you're just starting from the get-go, keep a log or a ledger, notebook, or make note tabs in your iPhone and pretty much write down, take little notes about what you're planning and where, because not everything's going to always work. But you start the process now, you learn from it, make notes, how the plants fare, how the deer utilize them, and learn and go from there what works best on your property. It's hard to recall a lot of stuff by memory sometimes. We're such busy people nowadays with our lives that make these notes, be detailed with them. They don't have to be too extravagant, just simple details, what works, what doesn't work, how much traffic are you getting from the deer, and that's going to really improve your future food plot needs. Well, that was supposed to be the last tip, but I just realized I skipped over one of my notes here. But one thing to do too, and it's such a misconception, a lot of people do this, they plant their seeds way too deep. You don't have to do that. You'll smother them. You wouldn't believe really how not deep, so to speak, that you don't have to plant your food plots. Brassicas and clovers can be literally 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch deep. That's it. That's literally, you can push that in with your finger. So just make sure you don't, plant them too deep. They don't need to go down 6 inches or anything like that. So hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you guys can learn a thing or two. Hopefully this is going to take something from this and improve your hunting property and your hunting season. And that's what this is all about, like always. But make sure you guys check us out, Outdoor Podcast channel, podbros.com. Make sure to leave us a review. The last 2 weeks, both my guys that I was real excited to have on had to back out due to scheduling issues with some of the hunts they've been on. So hopefully I'm going to have a new guest for us next week. But that's it, guys. We'll see you next week.